Hi. Hi, I'm Sun. I'm with Madelinetosh. And just in case you're not familiar with Madelinetosh, we are a hand-dyed yarn company reestablished in 2019 by Laura and Doug Zander of the Jimmy Beans family of brands. So Madelinetosh is located in Fort Worth, Texas, and our company values and promotes inclusivity, community, and collaboration, which brings me to introducing our latest collaborative partner, Dawn Barker of Barker Wool. Good morning, Dawn.
Good morning.
So do you want to introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about who you are?
Sure. I am Dawn Barker of Barker Wool. You may have known my family business under a different name about a year ago. We first established as Chasing Rabbits Fiber Company in 2017 when we started, and we did go through a brand change last year. We had someone come after us for some possible copyright infringement and brand confusion over a similar name. And so we decided to go ahead and rebrand, and we chose Barker Wool because it's who we are. And like I said, it is a family business. It's just me, and my husband helps as much as he can. And we have two nearly grown sons that help quite a bit too. We live in Amarillo, Texas, way up in the Panhandle. If you're not familiar with Texas, we're way up at the top. We are actually closer to Colorado and northern New Mexico than we are the rest of the state of Texas. So that's where we are. I do all the dyeing, all the email answering, all the shipping, all the designing and knitting, pretty much everything myself. So we are still a small company, but we're thrilled that Madelinetosh reached out to us and asked us to collaborate on this. Assigned pooling is something that I'm really passionate about, and it's been a fun exploration, and I'm just thrilled that other people have wanted to jump in with us on that ride.
So before we get to assigned pooling, can we talk a little bit about your creative journey and how you came to knitting and maybe your art background just a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I feel like I've always been an artist. I feel like I was born that way. I can remember in grade school being teased for scribbling when I was just blending new colors with my crayons, and I didn't understand why other people didn't understand that I didn't want to stay in the lines. I wanted to make my own thing. But I did spend quite a bit of time over the last 15 years as a fine artist. I used to co-own an art gallery. I represented my own art as well as quite a few other artists here in Amarillo. And when that kind of chapter came to an end, I took about a year off to decide what I wanted to do next. And I've been knitting since I was about 7 years old, and I've always had a passion for fiber, and becoming a dyer just seemed to be, for me, a natural way to blend my love of color and color theory and art with fiber. So that's how we started.
Can you talk about how you developed assigned pooling? I think that story is really, really interesting.
Okay, hope so. Yeah, as a dyer, I really love making variegated skeins because it's a fun chance to play with a lot of different colors. My fine art that I always created is still abstract. And so I spoke a lot in color dynamics, the way colors worked with each other, and repetitive pattern, things like that in my art. And so dyeing colorful skeins of yarn with lots of colors is lots of fun, but as a knitter, I didn't always really love the results that I would get when I'd start knitting with it. And it kind of started me down this journey of trying to come up with ways to hide pooling and understand pooling better, and come up with ways that I could disguise it and manage it and manipulate it. And I actually worked for the better part of a year compiling a bunch of different techniques, and wrote curriculum for a class that I was asked to teach about that. And as soon as I finished teaching that class, it kind of just occurred to me that since pooling is something that is going to happen, whether you want it to or not, and now that I have a better understanding of why it happens and when it happens, why not try to make it a feature instead of something to be hidden? And So because I had spent so much time working with different texture stitches and understanding the concept behind pooling, it was easy for me to make that leap into assigned pooling. I named it assigned pooling because it really is quite different than planned pooling, which is something else entirely. That is, the names get swapped a lot, but it technically is not planned pooling. Planned pooling works more where you're, it's a little bit more rigid. You have to have a specific number of stitches cast on and a specific shape being used in order for it to really work. And you can get really interesting effects with that. But one of the nice things I think about assigned pooling is that you're kind of letting the yarn drive. You're letting the color changes within the skein of yarn determine where that texture pattern is going to go next. And so it's a little bit more free form. You still have guideposts to keep you in your lane, but you have a little bit more freedom as far as where the pattern is going to fall. So
yeah,
that was kind of how it started.
I love that. We had a customer question that I want to ask you. So what was the inspiration for the bunnies in your logo?
So the bunnies, the bunnies are definitely still, we did have to change our name during the rebrand, but we were able to keep our original logo, which was important to us. Chasing Rabbits, which is our original name, always represented curiosity to me. And I strongly believe that's one of kind of our core values with our family and our business is to stay curious and continue to learn and grow. And that really describes a lot about my journey personally as a person and as an artist. I think it's really important to continue to learn and be curious about things as we age. And so the perpetually chasing rabbits in our logo represents that for me. So that's a good question.
Yeah, I thought that was a great one. And the logo is so cute.
It's actually an ancient symbol called the three hares. You can look that up. It crosses a lot of different cultures. Nobody knows exactly who came up with it first. So it's kind of interesting that it has a very long and relatively mysterious history. It's been seen in all kinds of different cultures, so in different ways.
Oh, that's very cool. Very thoughtful. So one of the things that we did want to mention just in the beginning was, I know we asked when folks signed up that if they wanted to be on the newsletter, that you could sort of opt in. For Dawn's newsletter, you actually can't opt in. Do you want to explain if folks want to be on your newsletter?
Yes, my website values your right to choose very highly. And so I actually cannot physically go in and put people on my mailing list. You have to sign up yourself. So I would love for you to join me on and keep up with my newsletter and what's going on around here. But unfortunately, the sign up that you did for this event is not going to cover that. So if you do want to be part of that, I'll need you to go to my website, which is barkerwool.com. And within the first 5 seconds of landing on the page, you should get a pop-up asking you if you'd like to be part of that newsletter. So yes, that's it.
All right. And before we reveal the collaboration, can we just talk about inspiration a little bit and sort of where you find your inspiration?
Sure. It might be easier to explain where I don't get inspiration. I try to live my life with my eyes open all the time, and you never know where inspiration is going to strike. Obviously, I think to me anyway, it's obvious when I look at my work that nature is a big inspiration for me. But it could be a feeling, it could be a state of mind, it could be obviously, like I said, nature, it plays a big part in it, but it could just be a lot of different things. It can be music, can be just pop culture, things going on in my life. I'm kind of, I don't know, I feel like my collection of work is very autobiographical, but nobody else understands that, and that's okay. So yeah.
I think that's how it works for most people, right? Especially most creative people. You look at something and it has a timestamp.
You're right. Mm-hmm. definitely.
So I know we've been kind of, we've been teasing the collaboration a little bit. Should we let folks know, start with what the inspiration for the collaboration was?
Sure. We decided to, Sun and I spoke quite a bit about what we wanted to use as our jumping off point. And we decided that because assign pooling works really well with basic bold two color, like highly contrasting color splits, to really be able to see that the texture stitches show up, that we decided that pop art would be a great place to start. So this is a pop art inspired collection.
And kind of as we were talking about it, we felt like that was something that was true to both of our companies.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't a big departure, and it was really fun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So so one of the things when we were talking about and looking at the collaboration, and one of the Madelinetosh values, I'll kind of go back to that maybe just a tiny bit, is when we're talking about collaborations, like some of the fun parts about this we're both in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of cool. Both companies are run by women. Mm-hmm. Lots of hand dyeing, lots of colors, lots of innovation. So it was really sort of attractive from a lot of those standpoints. And then we felt like it would be really fun to partner and see what it could look like. Right?
Definitely. Yes. Definitely.
So there was a lot of pre-planning and pre-collaborating. And then there was a lot of playing with color, which was the really fun part, right?
Always is. Yes.
Dawn's putting together mood boards of colors, of things that could work. The creative team at Tosh is doing the same thing. And then we're trying to figure out what will actually work, dye some stuff up, see if what we think will work will actually work. And I think we came up with some really strong and exciting colors.
Yeah. And can I also mention one thing about the companions to these colors? So one of the brilliant things that Madelinetosh has done in this collaboration is they and their creative team have used a lot of the colors for this collaboration that have a companion skein that goes with it. So for instance, the background of one might be very similar to another one of their standard colorways. So that automatically builds a lot of strength into that collection so that you can have other options that can automatically go with it. So you have anything else to say about that? Did I explain that well enough?
I think so. When we get into talking about the patterns a little bit, I think it'll maybe become more clear.
Yeah.
Maybe can Anne-Marie join us to show off the colors?
So how many a month are we doing and for how long?
So we're doing 2 colors a month. We're definitely planned out through the next 4 months, but that doesn't mean that it ends there.
Right.
That just means we need to dye more yarn and play more.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
All right. Do y'all want to reveal the name? These are the 2 colors. Comic book art and everyday objects.
Do you want to give the color names, the standard color names, so people?
Yeah, sure. So if you're familiar with some of the Madelinetosh colorways, this background is Stormborn and Edison Bulb. It's the pop. And this one, correct me if I'm wrong, Sun, Dr. Zhivago Sky.
Scratched record.
Scratch record, just kidding. Scratch record. In Havana.
Madelinetosh does have about 2,400 colors, so trying to keep all the gray straight is really tough.
So really cool.
We are super, super excited about it. Thanks, Anne-Marie. All right, so a couple of the other sort of housekeeping things about this. One of the really cool things that we're excited about is Dawn is going to get a royalty off of every skein that sells for this collaboration. And because this is her invention and this was really something that she put together, we're really excited about that and feel like it supports our community in a really special way. All the patterns that we're going to be promoting for this are Dawn's patterns, and you can find them at barkerwool.com or on Dawn's Ravelry site. So, and there's a lot of them. So in doing some prep work for this, I'm going, Dawn, what patterns, what should I be trying? What should I be testing? I hadn't done a assigned pooling before. And Dawn sends me like 12 patterns.
There you go. Get these done by next week.
Yes. So I did some swatches. I didn't make everything. But it was really fun to kind of dive in. And I think what we should do is, do we want to maybe talk a little bit about like where the color names came from and the inspiration that way? And then as the color names debut for future months, it'll sort of roll out in a similar direction.
Sure. Yeah. So the first one, comic book art, is inspired by Roy Lichtenstein's art. And if you're not familiar with his work, they looked a lot like comic book art, and he was quite famous in the heyday of modern pop art, mid-century, of the last century, and he used a lot of really bold graphic colors, a lot of primary triads. And like I said, a comic book style. And so that one was a pretty easy one to name. I think you guys really nailed it on that. So, and then everyday objects, that was another effort in the pop art movement to highlight and elevate everyday objects into art. And that definitely was the inspiration for the second colorway for this first month as well.
So we got together to name the colors because we did do all of this collaboratively, and Dawn shows up and she's got all of this pop art, like the pictures all ready to go so we can match skeins to the actual pictures. It was so much fun. That was like one of the most fun meetings. Instead of being like, well, what are we going to do? It was all right there. And then we're kind of matching things up and figuring out how they debut. So
I want to make sure and do my homework. But it was fun to do that for sure. Naming art is really important to me. That was, as an abstract artist, I can't rely on realism to get the point across. So the way you feel when you look at one of my pieces might be completely different than the intent that I was trying to get across. So the name is one way that I can kind of nudge people in the right direction to understand what I was trying to say. And so I really enjoy naming colorways too. I still get to kind of play with that theme. So yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, it was a very fun meeting. So should we talk a little bit about the different techniques that you use in assigned pooling? Because assigned pooling is more of an umbrella than a specific thing.
Yeah. So I feel like everybody has really latched on to the float shawl and calico and glide, which all three of those use the floret cluster stitch. And that's wonderful. I'm glad that it's become so popular. But that is just one tiny bit of what assigned pooling can be. And so assigned pooling literally is just when you assign a different texture stitch to the color change within a skein of variegated yarn. And I have them kind of broken down into motif-based stitches, and floret cluster is an example of that, and long chain version stitches, and the tiny baubles, and the sprout stitch, and the linen stitch, like Sun's showing now. Those are all examples of more of a long chain version. The differentiation between the two of those would be that motif-based stitches, you're actually trying to accomplish the entire motif before, like when that color change runs out, before you move on to your background texture again. Most of these are written in whatever texture stitch and stockinette as the background, because it provides a really beautiful blank canvas for the background, but not always. There are other other background stitches that you can play with too that are maybe a little bit more advanced because your brain has to kind of switch back and forth between the two. But motif-based stitches, again, you're trying your best to accomplish the entire little floret or whatever it is, spool stitch, before you move on. The long chain ones are a little bit more forgiving because you just literally just keep making that stitch over and over again until that color runs out. So it's those are a little bit easier to work into different shapes.
So florets, I know you've said, are the most popular.
Mm-hmm.
When we're looking at those types of stitches, there was the spool stitch and sort of a modified spool stitch.
Mm-hmm. The spool stitch is really very versatile. I came up with it after the floret cluster. That was one of the first ones I started with. The spool stitch looks very similar from a glance, just at first glance, but it is different. And it is made without having to turn your work over twice, which you do have to do in the floret cluster. So that's something that is a challenge for some people. They don't necessarily like that part of it. So the spool stitches, you get a similar effect, but you don't have to turn your work. And it is very versatile because you can change the look of it based on how many stitches you use for the core of your spool. So all that's explained in the patterns, but it is, you can do a lot with it. You can play with it and change the look of it.
So then on the long textured stitches, you have the linen stitch and the tiny bobbles.
Mm-hmm.
Is there one more?
The sprout stitch is one more. And counting. I mean, I'm still constantly coming up with new things that will work. I kind of have a self-imposed set of rules that I keep myself to, that if you can reconcile it on one row, if you or at one time before you move on, like with almost like a series of short rows, if you can do it without having to dip down below or having to do something again to it when you come to it again, things like that. If you can pretty much take care of business while you're in that color section, then it usually works pretty well for assigned pooling. It has to be, you have to be able to make it from both sides of the work. Just different little things like that. So again, I have kind of the rules that I've set for this game. So it's a little bit like a puzzle for me. And if I can make a stitch work in that, then it becomes a pattern eventually. And if not, then nobody ever sees that part. But yeah, I'm always playing with new textures.
Well, and since this is based in Stockinette, it felt like it was really great for beginners because you do have a special stitch that you're doing, but in general, it's a lot of knitting and a lot of purling. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a lot of counting.
I've had a lot of people tell me that it's the perfect blend between mindless knitting and engaging. So like, it's not completely boring, like just garter or stockinette can be on its own, but yet it's not so hard that you couldn't do it at knit night with your friends and take it somewhere. So yeah, I like hearing things like that because I do like the meditative quality of knitting. That's important to me. And that's, I feel like I'm a process and a product knitter. I enjoy both equally, but the process is definitely a big part of that. And the rhythm of it and the meditative quality of it is something I groove on, I guess. But yeah, so I feel like this is a pretty good blend of, no, not always. Some of the other patterns like Twinkle is one that you're working in a 2x2 rib as the background and then spool stitches on top of that. So you have to keep track of where you are in the ribbing. When you finish a spool stitch, you have to jump back into the established pattern. And so that's a little bit more challenging, stuff like that. But the ones that are based on Stockinette are a lot easier to flow with.
So one of the things, if you look at my swatches, and I'm not sure that you can see from the website, they all have exactly the same number of stitches, but they're all different shapes. And I felt like assigned pooling gave me a really interesting take on gauge. Because one of the things, so the spool stitch was one of the ones that I did. And at first I had cast on 50 stitches. And when I cast on 50 stitches, not only did I have assigned pooling, I had planned pooling.
You had planned pooling, yes.
And all of my stitches were lining up exactly. So I had to take it out, I switched needle sizes first and went back to 50 stitches, but I was still getting planned pooling and I didn't want that. So then I went ahead and made it, I think 40 stitches, and tried it again. And then because I wanted the pattern to be kind of cool and going back and forth, this to me was much prettier than having all of my spools in a row where it would have sort of distorted the fabric. But yeah, I think that might be cool in a different way for a different thing.
Yes. So that's one of the, I'm glad you bring that up, because I get asked this question a lot. Will these stitches work on any project? Like, can I just do this on a sock, or can I do it on a sweater or a hat, or, lots of different shapes? And the answer, basic answer is yes, you can switch up the shape, but you're not going to get exactly the same effect that you will, depending on the shape that you're working on. So one of the things that I teach when I teach my sweater class in this is that if you think about a sweater, you've got multiple shape zones that you're working in. You've got kind of a cone shape that you're working on for the yoke, and then a cylinder for the body and smaller cylinders for the sleeves. And that pooling dispersion, or in other words, where those texture stitches fall, the way that those are dispersed, is going to change based on the direction that you're knitting, whether you're knitting flat or in the round, and also the number of stitches that you're using. So that's why this works really well with things like triangles where you're doing regular increases, and you can use the same stitches on a rectangle or in the round, but you're going to get a different dispersion. And every person's gauge, as we know, is different, and every skein of yarn can be different. I mean, these are not printed on a computer; these are hand dyed, and that's something important to point out too, that even when one person is doing all the dyeing, there can be differences in the color lengths, in the background tonality, all of those things. So these are each individually hand-painted works of art, in my opinion. And so there will be, the results that you get might be a little bit different than the pattern that you see, but that's okay. That's part of the beauty of it, because it is very free. I always try to tell people to think of this as watercolors instead of screen printing. So
I love that description.
Yeah.
That's so true. Yeah. So this is the tiny baubles, and they just kept falling right on top of each other, but I thought it was really fun, so I just left it. So, it's fun to see and then do the thing that you like it to be. But I did think it was a really interesting sort of gauge dilemma. Yes. And that was one of kind of the fun things about looking through the patterns too, because there's some things that are striped. So if something's going to be striped, that your assigned pooling is going to be further apart than maybe if it's just assigned pooling skeins together. So if you
stripe with two different assigned pooling skeins, which you can do, you almost get two separate pooling dispersions transposed on top of each other. And that's really cool too, because you can almost pick out especially if you're working on a rectangle, you can pick out the way you can predict the way they're moving. So that's the thing about this. They look very random. They're actually not random at all, because you know that there's a certain amount of distance between each color repeat, and you know exactly where, like how many stitches you're using. So you could actually plot out exactly where each one was going to fall if you decided that you needed to do that. You could.
So I played with this shawl this week just to try to figure it out a little bit. And one of the really fun things was going from like one set of tiny baubles to then it keeps growing with the increases, and then it got to 2 and then 3 and then 5. And I think it was 6 at the end. Yes.
Yeah.
So 6%. So, cause I striped with a not assigned pooling. So, but there was something about that. And it's a little bit like when you have a striped yarn and every time you're like, I'm just going to knit to the next color change. It was the same thing with this. I'm just going to knit to the next assigned pooling block. That's
another thing that I've heard a lot, is that like people want to just make one more cluster or one more, they have to get to the next one. And that's, I love things that are engaging like that you want to keep going, because it can become monotonous if you're doing something large, and it's good to have little goals, I guess, with built into a project. So
absolutely. So we have Float, which I think was maybe one of your first and most popular of all time,
Yeah.
knit up in comic book art.
Mhm.
So Anne-Marie showing that off. So, and that is the floret clusters.
Uh-huh. And so that's a 3 skein project, and it is a right triangle, and it is stockinette all the way through until you get to the border at the end, and then it's 2x2 ribbing with the florets on top of it. And you can even build those florets into the bind off, so they go all the way to the edge. That's another fun thing for me about assigned pooling, is that when the color falls on the edge of the work or at the very end, it's kind of fun to incorporate that in and have it almost spill off of the edge. I think that's kind of a neat effect. So it's my opinion.
Absolutely. So I played with your stuff, and I'll show this one off. I think we were all a little bit obsessed with comic book art. So I had a skein of Silver Fox in my stash and did a very tonal stripe. And this is Rome.
Rome. Uh-huh.
This is Rome. And then I striped it, so I made it a little bit different. And then the edging I made a little bit different too, because this was only part of a skein and I wanted it to be fairly large. So I did the edging in a different color.
So
but it was the tiny baubles, and it was, so one of the fun things, like there's clusters. I don't know if you can see that. And then there's spaces where it's more dispersed. And I kind of loved the way, once I had it on the blocking board, there was some balance in where things were clustered and where things were dispersed that I found really pleasing in a very abstract art kind of way.
A lot of times when you look at it, especially when you get it finished and you've got it out, when you're blocking it and your eye starts cueing in on all these different little patterns that have formed, it feels very much like a printed textile to me. And so that's actually where the name calico came from for one of my shawls. Was it reminded me very much of a calico print of little flowers. So it's fun because it's kind of blurring the lines between different styles of textiles and embroidery and printing and knitting and all of those things. So yeah.
So as I was going through with the Madelinetosh yarns, I did find that we were sitting, when you talk about assigned pooling in your patterns, you sort of give an estimated number of stitches to do and then wraps for spool, or the same thing with the way the floret clusters are done, of like how many knits and things like that. And the Madelinetosh yarns definitely sat towards the shorter end of those. So if it was tiny baubles, I think my tiny baubles for my gauge were 3, not, and I think the pattern that I was looking at had a range of 3 to 7.
Right. And that's something that you got to keep in mind, is that, again, everybody's gauge is different and everybody's yarn that they're using is going to be different, and that's okay. And I've tried to give instructions in the patterns to help you with that, because that is one thing. The assigned pooling patterns are always written. They're written very differently than a traditional knitting pattern. You're given the shaping instructions first. So you have to continue to make those are the guideposts I was talking about. You're going to continue to make that shape throughout the whole thing. But then when the color change occurs, you have to stop and do something different. And so there's a different stitch that's assigned to that color change. And it will depend very much on, like we said, your, sorry, I just got distracted in the comments. Did not look over there. That's the bad thing about Zoom. It moved and I'm like, I keyed in on it. But yeah, it can definitely change depending on your own personal gauge. And so that's why the motif-based stitches, especially probably the most difficult in that respect, is the floret cluster, because you are trying to kind of use up all of that color before you move on. And so you might have to change the number of stitches you're basing that cluster on. The spool stitch is a little bit more forgiving because you just keep wrapping until the color is finished. So that one's a little easier. But that's one of the nice things about the long chain versions, is that you just keep making it like the tiny baubles. You just keep making tiny baubles until your color's finished. Yeah, and then this one is actually a combination of stockinette stitch and linen stitch. I'm a huge fan of linen stitch. I love linen stitch. And this was a combination that I did to try to mimic the look of visible mending. And that's where the name of the mend shawl came from. So that's another one of the original 3 patterns that I came out with for the very first class that I taught in this. So mend, sprout, and float were the very first 3. And mend uses a combination of stockinette and linen.
Yeah, I'm fully obsessed with mend. That will be the next one.
It's fun because it's kind of a, like, you really do have to think a lot more in that one. It's deceptively simple. You know, it looks like it's pretty easy, but you do have to kind of, you have to look ahead at what's coming and make sure you fall back into that linen pattern. So it's a little bit of a challenge. I've been told that it is not a knit night project, and I kind of would agree with that. But yeah, it's really beautiful when you're finished, the 2 together.
And I think on that one, I played with it at the bottom. The knits are lined up, so it's almost like a ribbing. At the top, I tried to do every other. And I love both of them. So that didn't help me to make a choice for.
That's why you don't control it. You just let it happen. But, you know.
Well, and I mean, I think that was sort of the interesting thing in playing with these is you could sort of control it though.
Yes. Yeah.
Like with this guy, obviously it started and they were sort of like stacking up, and then I changed needle sizes to get them to be a little more random.
Yes.
They're not super random, but I sort of knew the look that I wanted, and I could figure out how to manipulate it a little bit, and it wasn't that crazy. So, and part of that was your instruction, because I think it's about a page for each pattern on how to do the assigned pooling and how to change it, how to alter it, how to make it what you want, which was really cool.
So there are a lot of judgment calls that you have to make with this. And like what happens if you fall on the center spine where your increases are supposed to be, and it's where you need to make a floret cluster, or what if you're at the edge where an increase needs to be, or you're where a decrease needs to be, or what if you end up on the end and you don't have enough stitches left to make your full cluster, like all kinds of questions like that. And I try to cover those in the patterns. I also have a couple of videos on YouTube, and I'm working on some new ones as well that go over a little bit more detail about more of the stitches. And because you definitely have to think about your knitting a little bit more with these than just following step by step in a pattern. But I think that's the fun part of it. So I hope that's a fun challenge.
So I know that we have a sneak peek of a pattern that's going to be coming up for September, and it also is in one of the colors for September. So do you want to show off that sneak peek?
Are we allowed to say the name or no? I mean, the name of the pattern, but the name of the colorway, are we keeping that?
No, we'll get zapped.
That's right. Our seats will get buzzed. We have buzzers hooked up. So this is it. This one is called Fizz, and it is a loop. So I've been asked since I first came out with assigned pooling. Another common question that I get is, can I use this in the round? And do you have any cowl patterns? I want a cowl pattern. And so I finally came up with a cowl. I prefer long loops like this because they're long enough that you can wear them on their own like that. But they're also long enough that you can double it when it's cold out. FedEx just dropped off some yarn at my house. If anybody heard the doorbell ring, sorry about that. So yes, this is Fizz. So that's going to be coming out next month. The pattern will drop at the same time as the 2 colors that are coming out next month. And I'll try to give you a little bit of a close-up of it. This is Tiny Baubles. There we go. It's focusing a little bit there.
And what's your background on that?
Yeah, so this is Tiny Baubles with linen stitch as the background. So I did that because, of course, if I had done stockinette in the round, I wanted this to be, okay, let me back up. I like simple shapes. I don't like a lot of fuss on edges. I mean, I like a good I-cord edge. I like linen stitch at the end or 2x2 rib, just something very clean and simple. And I work, like I said before, a lot on top of stockinette because I feel like it gives a really good background. But for this, of course, if you have knit cowls before, if you knit stockinette in the rounds, the whole thing is just going to roll up on itself and you're going to look like you have this like rope instead of a cowl. So in an effort to make it lay flatter, I used my favorite linen stitch as the background for this with the tiny baubles. So it's very similar to the tiny baubles used in Rome. But I wanted them to be almost like little bubbles floating up in a glass. So that's why I named it Fizz. So
Right. So every month about the 20th, there's going to be 2 new colors debuting in this collaboration. So, and we do have some new patterns coming down the pike, like Fizz.
Mhm.
At some point in time, there may be some different weights of yarn for a pattern because Dawn has traditionally only dyed and fingering. So,
because it's my favorite, yes.
so stay tuned for that. There's all kinds of newness coming out and we can only tease. We're not actually going to tell what it is. So sorry about that.
Have to come back for more.
Exactly. Exactly. We have a couple minutes. So do you want to do, what advice would you give to a knitter who's never done assigned pooling?
Yeah, I think that if you know the basics, knitting and purling and casting on and binding off, then you're going to learn a few new ways to use those basic skills. But I would recommend that you just give it a try and don't give up. And I am available for pattern support. I answer a lot of emails with questions about how all of this works, and I'm always happy to do that. And you know, I think it's important as we grow as knitters, or it just as people in life. That's part to me, it's part of staying curious, is to learn a new skill. Every time you make a new pattern, it's great to try something new that you haven't tried before, because that's how you're gonna grow your skills. And then believe me, by the time you finish one of these projects, you're going to be an expert on how to make a tiny bauble or a floret cluster. You'll be able to teach all your friends.
And watch TV while you do it.
Exactly. Yep. You'll get to that. Maybe not movie theater, but you could watch TV. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. I am going to throw to Libby, who I think is going to do a giveaway.
Hello. Okay, it's giveaway time. Today we're going to give away 2 prizes. Each prize will be 2 skeins of either everyday objects or comic book art in Madelinetosh base, and you get to select which base plus one of Dawn Barker's beautiful patterns. So winners are going to be selected at random using a number generator. If I call your name, please respond in the chat, and someone from Madelinetosh will be in touch. So we're going to try this out. Is Andrea Comer here? Andrea, if you're not here, you can't win. Okay, I'm moving on. Debbie Phillips. Debbie? Is Debbie out there?
I can't wait to tell her she didn't win because she wasn't here. I know her.
No. Okay, we're moving on. Tristane Thiessen. Tristane. Okay, I'm moving on. Barbara York. Barbara, are you out there? Well, these people are SVP'd.
She's another friend of mine. She needs to be
wow. Okay. Lisa Ward. Lisa's not here either. I have one more name, and then I'm just going to randomly pick someone from some of these happy. Oh, wait. Oh, who's that?
No, I want to be picked.
Oh, that is hysterical. Oh my gosh. I love that. Okay, one more name. Wilhelmina. Is Wilhelmina here?
Uh-uh.
No. All right, I'm gonna pick one, and then I'm gonna have Anne Marie pick one. I'm picking Paula because Paula like jumped out and did that crazy thing, and she went outside her comfort zone, and I just think that's awesome. So Paula, you're one of the winners,
Okay,
and we'll be in touch. We have your email.
you do.
And we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Anne Marie, you want to pick a winner?
Sure, I'm just gonna do this randomly.
Yep.
Hi, babes. Candy White.
Yay, Candy. All right, Candy and Paula, you're the winners for today. It pays to show up when you RSVP. We'll be in touch. Okay, so we literally have 10 minutes. I want Sun, and I'm gonna just jump in here because we got to keep it moving. I have a couple of fun questions to ask each of you, just to keep it kind of fun. Someone asked a really funny question, and so I am just gonna throw this one out there. Unicorn or genie in a bottle? Was so random and fun that we all kind of had a giggle about it. So
Genie.
I said unicorn, but I don't know.
Genie, definitely Genie, because then you get 3 wishes.
It's
Okay.
but this question specifically was unicorn or genie in a bottle.
Oh, not out of the bottle.
I absolutely picked genie as well because I'm sorry, I absolutely picked unicorn as well because a genie in a bottle is pretty much a prisoner who is at the will of whoever finds it. And a unicorn is unique and noble and uses its powers for good. And I'd rather be a unicorn.
I guess I'm feeling chastened.
That's just my opinion.
Sun, do you have a
I'm gonna have to go
What would you rather be?
unicorn as well. I don't know, as a child of the 80s, unicorns were everything. And that used to be what I would doodle, in math class along the side of the paper.
Were they sparkly unicorns?
They weren't sparkly, but I think they were rainbowed.
Okay.
So I think they always had a lot of colors in them.
Yeah. Mhm. For sure.
Anne Marie?
I think I would say Genie in the Bottle. Why not?
Cool.
Because I like stuff. I'd probably put it on my shelf, like show it off.
Okay, how about one more quick one, and then we have to kind of close it out because we want to give you some details about where you can shop for the yarn. How about, Dawn, what's your favorite maker tool?
Oh,
Ooh.
man, if I had to just pick one. Okay, so I have this one tapestry needle that I've had since I was a little kid. And I am so precious about that thing. Like I won't loan it out to my friends. Like I do everything I can. It has a special case and I use it all the time. I use it every time I bind anything off or weave it ends. And yeah, so it's very important to me, but needle wise, I'm ChowGoo all the way. Yeah, love ChowGoos.
Sun, what about you?
Snaps have changed my color work life, and my very favorite knitting is color work. So I'm gonna have to say Snaps. If we're going with needles, I'm totally on with ChowGoo, sorry. But the flexi flips from Addie are unbelievable, and especially the square ones. Love those.
Cool.
Amazing. What about you, Anne Marie?
I'm also gonna go team Snaps, specifically the bucket bag. That's definitely like changed my color work life as well. No more tangled skeins.
Yeah.
Nice plug. All right. I think we have to wrap this up because we want to give time to drop in some links into the chat so everyone knows where to go for what. So Sun, you want to wrap it up? And as Sun talks, I will be dropping things into the chat on where you can get the collection, where you can shop.
All right, and Anne Marie, I think is just making the page live where you can shop now. So let's go through all the kind of important details. So you can buy the Madelinetosh Barker Wool collaboration yarn at 26, which I think just became 28 local yarn shops. And we do have a listing of those on the secret web page. So madelinetosh.com/pages, Madelinetosh-x-barker-wool. But Libby's putting that in the chat. You can also get it directly at madelinetosh.com. You can buy the assigned pooling patterns from Dawn at barkerwool.com and in her Ravelry shop. And then the best way to stay updated, because we've talked about dropping 2 new colors every month and that there's going to be new patterns and all kinds of other cool things, is to subscribe to our newsletters. So remember, for Dawn's newsletter, you have to go to her site and sign up. If you clicked yes for the Madelinetosh newsletter, we will get you subscribed. And then Madelinetosh also has text messaging. And one of the cool parts about text is you get early access to a lot of things. So sign up to stay in touch. And then make sure to hashtag your projects at Madelinetosh or Madtosh, sorry, Madtosh X Barker Wool, original assigned pooling, Madelinetosh, and Barker Wool. And then follow us on Instagram at barker.wool and Madelinetosh. And then don't forget to check back for new colors and designs. We're also potentially talking about a knit along. So these will be things that are coming. So keep checking back. All right. Hi, Kimberly. Yes on the knit along. I'm with you.
Oh, oops. I just shot like happy shopping 3 times. Sorry, I just got really excited. So that's in the chat. Okay, I think that's it. And thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Sun. Thank you, Anne Marie. I can see Laura. Laura, wave. I just noticed you in the sidebar. Our wonderful leader up there. Hi, Laura. Thanks everyone. Dawn, this was amazing. We are so excited. And like, I don't know, we can start shopping and make sure to shop at our local yarn shops first.
Yes, definitely. And I 2 seconds. I just want to thank you guys all. Everybody on the team has been just a dream to work with. And Laura, thank you. I've said this before, but this is not a new style of dyeing, and this isn't something that everybody has asked to partner with me on. And I just appreciate the lifts on this more than you know. So thank you so much. It means so much to me that we're actually working together, collaborating rather than competing. So you guys really mean it when you say that. And I can attest to that. And I am very grateful. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.